So the next requirement that we have is we need to set up controls so that the user can edit their to-dos. We'll start off by going into the HTML, and what we need to do is we need to put in two inputs for this requirement. One for the position of the item that we want the user to be able to change, and one for the new to-do text. So I'm going to create a div, and inside my div I will put my first input, and let's set the type to number this time, and I'm going to assign an ID to this, and the ID for this is going to be edit td pause input for position input. So we're setting the type to number because we are setting up a field that is going to take numeric data. Then we're going to set up our second input field, and this one is going to be a text input, and this one will have an ID of edit td text input. And then we'll set up our button, and our button is going to have the onClick attribute, and the onClicked attribute is going to be equal to the handlers.editTD. So it's really similar to what we did with the add button. The only difference really is that we have two input fields here. If we save and we check this out in the browser, this is what the new page is going to look like. So let's go into our JavaScript, and in our handlers object we're going to add the new text. So I'm going to put a comma here, and we'll make a new property called editTD. I'll make it equal to a function, and we're going to start off by setting up a couple of variables to store the information. So we'll make one called editTD pause input, and we're going to make that equal to document.getElementById, and we're going to set it to the corresponding input field. Then we'll set up a second variable that is going to store the information that the user enters into the text input field. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use tdlist.edittd, and remember that our edittd property is going to take two arguments, the position and the to-do text. So in the parentheses here, we're going to pass in the names of these two variables. So the first one is going to get the position input text dot value, because we want to be able to retrieve that information from that input field. And then we'll use a comma, and we'll specify the value of the text item that they want to be the new text. So that's pretty much exactly the same as what we did up here. We're just running it on our edittd method, which takes two arguments. So once again, we want to run the edittd method on the tdlist object, and this method takes a position, which is a number, and then it takes the to-do text argument. And actually what we're going to do here is, instead of using value for the edittd position input, let's use value as number, which is a property that ensures that the first argument is a number and is not a string. So when we get value, it's going to retrieve a string of text. Value as number is going to ensure that it is a numeric value. And similarly to what we did in our addTD function, we're going to want to set both of these input fields back to being empty once the user clicks the button. So I'll just go ahead and specify that I want the value to be equal to that empty string, just like we did before. And this time we're going to do it on both of the input fields. And that should be it. If we save this, let's test it out in our browser. I'm going to add a few items, and let's go ahead and add one other item. And now let's go ahead and let's try to augment one of these. So I'm going to augment item 2, and you'll notice that this input field's a little bit different. It has a counter, which is going to allow us to plug in a value. We could still type a value, or we can use these up-down arrows to select a number. And that's a result of us using the number type on the input field. And then I'm going to put what I want to edit this to, and let's go ahead and click our edit to-dos button. And I'm getting an error message here. So edit TD text input is not defined. Let's go back and look and see if we can find out what's happening. It says that this error message is on line 79, so that's going to be the first place that I'm going to look. And the problem is that when I wrote my edit TD text input variable name, I did not capitalize the D. So that is a common mistake that you might make. So I'm going to save that and let's refresh and just try this again. We'll add a couple of items and then we're going to specify that we want to augment item 2, which is at position 1, and we'll have a new to-do item listed. And now you can see that it actually launched the debugger. So I neglected to get rid of the debugger code that we had used at an earlier point in time. So I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to make sure that I delete the debugger. I don't want the debugger to be there. So I'll just delete that. We'll go back into the browser and I am just going to click resume script execution. And if we go back into our console, you can see that the code did work correctly. I am getting a warning here, and it's just saying the specified value, the empty string, is not a valid number. The value must match to the following expression. And this is happening on line 80. Let's just try making that string empty. So if we make this empty, let's see if we still have that problem. I'll refresh. I'll run this again. And now the code is fine. And because we're specifying that this needs to be a number in our HTML, and I had left my string open, as in making an empty string, the space is not recognized as a number. So that was kicking back a warning, even though the code was working correctly. So we just need to close that up for this one. And really, we could close it up for all of them. I mean, it doesn't really matter for these text input fields, but that probably would be smart to do. Needless to say, once I fix that, I can add items to do. I can choose to select one of those items and change it to something else. And the application is running in the way that we would expect. So our new method is getting a reference to the 2 inputs. And then it's running our TD list edit TD. And the arguments are being pulled from the inputs. And we're making sure that the first value is a number with the value as number property. And then we're clearing the values by resetting them to nothing once we are done. So this takes care of our second requirement.